Greetings, everyone, and welcome to part 5 of the Visions of Dana Coverstone. It turns out that I originally did this message already. I recorded it on November the 9th, which was last Monday. So this is a special edition. After I recorded that message, I discovered I misspoke on about 3 different slides. I thought, oh, I wish I could redo that. But since then, a number of things have happened, so I kind of want to revamp that message. I want to keep my interpretation of Dana's data dream intact, but for a few things I wanted to change and update. So I'm going to call this the special edition. Like 90% of what I shared on October the 9th is still the same. A few things have been changed. So let's go ahead and proceed. I think it's safe to say that many evangelical Christians, many conservative Christians were absolutely shocked, if not surprised, when we discovered on November the 7th, a week ago today, that Biden had been declared the winner of the presidential election. Many of us assumed, and concluded, that it was Trump who was going to win the election, hands down, hands down. And so the question is, did Dana Coverstone, did he get it wrong? In fact, it turns out there were many evangelical Christians and preachers and prophets who were saying the same thing, that Trump was going to be reelected for a second term. Even Kim Clement, before he died, had mentioned that Trump was going to win a second term. So did all these prophets, including David Coverstone, did they all get it wrong? Did they get it wrong? And indeed, we should examine what the Bible says what a true prophet is. According to Jeremiah, at the time that he was living and preaching and teaching, Israel was in a state of absolute corruption. And he was the only prophet who was preaching doom and gloom for 40 years. Doom and gloom, telling the Israelites if they did not repent, that God was going to send an invading army. He was going to wipe out the nation. And all the other prophets were saying, no, he's wrong. Peace and safety. Everything is fine and dandy. We are God's chosen people. We are God's chosen nation. Nothing is going to happen to us. And so again, Jeremiah was the only one who was preaching doom and gloom. So he challenged these so-called prophets. And this is what he told them. Jeremiah chapter 28, verse 9. So a prophet who predicts peace, which all of them were practically preaching this, must show that he is right. Only when his predictions come true can we know that it's really from the Lord. So if someone makes a prediction and they come to pass, then we can say, you know what, that person heard from God. If they don't come to pass, we can also say that person has not heard from God. So again, did Dana Coverstone hear from God? Or is this all something that he just got it wrong altogether without hearing from God? So I think we should answer that question by examining a couple of things. So first thing I want to do, I want to re-examine the dream that he posted on August 25th. This is the dream which the focus was on the month of November. And the dream began when he saw the month of November, and the calendar was dirty, bent, and torn. Now, looking back, I can say that perhaps that's a reference to the dirty election that we have just experienced in this nation. Dirty because of potential fraud and corruption. But soon time will tell whether this is true or not. But it's a possible interpretation. And then there's several things he saw for the month of November. And I don't think necessarily everything is in sequence. But this is one of the main things he saw for the month of November. He saw this headline which said essentially, Trump victory challenged everywhere. Trump victory challenged everywhere. And so on the second sermon of the series, I mentioned that I felt that Trump was going to be leading on the night of the election, but that the mail-in ballots may throw everything, may change everything. And then on the fourth part, I say, I believe that this is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court because of the mail-in ballots. That's exactly what's happened in either case. On the night of the election, sure enough, Trump was leading in Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And had he kept that lead, he easily would have won. So it was around 2 o'clock morning on Wednesday morning that Trump essentially declared himself to be victorious in this election. He told the world that he had won the election. Again, he came to that conclusion based upon the fact he was leading in these particular states. And as soon as he declared himself to be victor of this election, that victory, sure enough, was challenged by the media, by the entire media. There was no one who supported his claims of victory for the election. So the mainstream press immediately and quickly challenged him, as well as the news network channels. All of them, without exception, challenged Trump of his claim of victory. And one could say that potentially this is a fulfillment of what Dana Coverstone saw. But there's more important details about that dream. And one of them was that he saw a hand and the finger that was circling the 3rd of November, and it was going clockwise, okay? And then quite suddenly, there was a reversal. It went counterclockwise. Now, at the time, and when I recorded my sermon series back then, I didn't see anything significant, although I thought it was a curious thing. Why was it going clockwise, and then why suddenly did it go counterclockwise? I thought that was curious, but I didn't see anything too deep into that. But now I think I'm seeing something about the fact that it was reversed. Because after it was reversed, after the finger went counterclockwise and things were reversed, then and only then he began to see the cities on fire, including Washington, D.C. He saw violent protests. People were absolutely angry, and there were many angry mobs in the midst of the commotion because of the elections, and potentially because something had been reversed. And so now I'm asking, could the fact that the finger was went counterclockwise, could that be symbolic representation that the election results for some states which have already been declared for Biden could somehow be reversed? And that reversal would ultimately lead to Trump victory over Biden. And of course, that would lead to chaos and rioting and looting in our nation. Could it be they could signify a reversal again of our election results? Again, if that were to happen, you could see why there would be cities on fire, violent protests, and angry mobs. It wouldn't be a big surprise. So the question is it far-fetched? Is it far-fetched that the election result for some states may be reversed? Is it far-fetched? We all know that Pennsylvania, the case in Pennsylvania, is going to head all the way to the Supreme Court. And there are other states also right now in the midst of trials. And those cases may ultimately also lead to the Supreme Court. So eventually, I think the Supreme Court is the court that's going to decide this election. And there's many complaints of different types of fraud that took place, like dead people voting, people who were able to cure their ballots in Pennsylvania, the fact that Republicans were not allowed to witness the counting of the election, the fact that in the middle of the night, a bunch of states brought in ballots, Pennsylvania and Michigan, for example. And the fact that they shut down and then they reopened the next day, things had changed for Trump. But I think that the smoking gun, if this is true, that the smoking gun, the thing that can absolutely reverse the election, is the Dominion voting software, because there's a lot of accusations that there was cheating, fraud had taken place, and certain votes were taken from Trump and given to Biden, and that some of his votes were actually even deleted. That's the accusation. In fact, there's even a radical claim being made that the software, which is used to count the elections from these computers, deleted over 2.7 million votes nationwide, and then switched over 500,000 votes from Trump to Biden. That's a startling accusation if it is true. Absolutely startling. Of course, the mainstream media is absolutely rejecting these claims, and they say this is all conspiracy theory from the right, and there's no evidence, there's no proof that this actually happened. In fact, the elections were absolutely secure. Again, in this rejection, that Dominion software was somehow responsible for the defeat of Trump, that rejection is widespread among the mainstream press. Even the company itself, of course, I mean, if they were involved in doing something like that, they would not come on and say, yeah, we did this. No, of course not. But anyway, they have also denied this accusation that somehow their software was not secure and somehow they were responsible for Trump losing this election. But here's my question. If they are so secure and not open to fraud and manipulation of the votes, why is it that the state of Texas refused to certify Dominion voting systems for our election? In fact, the reason why they rejected them and chose not to choose them is because the fact that, you know, this is open to fraud, they said, and open to unauthorized manipulation of the data of the ballots. So that's just one aspect about all that. But even more startling is this, that a number of attorneys from Trump, they are saying something else. They're rejecting the claims of the mainstream press. Here we have one lawyer, Lynn Wood. This is a big-time attorney. In fact, you know, he's the attorney that was responsible for the case of Richard Jewell, who was accused of bombing the Olympics from the Atlantic bombing which took place several years ago. He was the attorney. In fact, Clint Eastwood made a movie. So this is a big-time attorney. And I'm amazed at how bold he is speaking. This is what he posted November 11. Time now to rest. Comfortable in my belief that Donald Trump won a historical landslide victory across the nation November 3rd. Be patient. Biden will never be president of our nation. To the contrary, Biden, along with many others, will be an inmate. Be patient. Trust Trump. I mean, it's pretty bold thing to be saying if it was not true. Why would he say that if it was not true? And then furthermore, today, November 14, he's saying, no, there's proof beyond any doubt that there was fraud. That Dominion is dirty and was part of an effort to steal our election. Again, that's a pretty bold thing to be saying if it was not true. And he also tweeted this also today. The evidence is irrefutable. You know, when the evidence is presented to the public, not even the mainstream press will be able to refute it. I mean, that's what he's saying. And it turns out he's not the only one who's saying that. Then we also have attorney Sidney Powell. She was the one who defended Michael Flynn rather successfully. But she's also saying the same thing. In fact, she said, release the Kraken. I'm going to release the Kraken. In other words, all hell's about to break loose. And I'm going to expose them all. Every one of them. And she's also being very bold in claims that yes, the Dominion software was responsible for Trump losing the election. And there's widespread fraud and widespread corruption. And she's going to get them all, expose them all. Pretty bold thing to be saying. And then also, finally, we have attorney Jenna Ellis also saying the same thing. In fact, she even went on to say that this may well be one of the greatest scandals in American history. Pretty bold thing to be saying. So all these attorneys who are working for Trump, who know what's going on, who know what's going on behind the scenes, who have seen the evidence, are saying the same thing. The Dominion software is the thing that caused him to lose the election because they were switching votes and deleting votes from Trump. Again, if this is true, it would certainly be the biggest corruption in American history. It would make the whole situation between Watergate from Nixon look like peanuts compared to this. And they're saying many people are going to go down. Many people are going to go to jail for this. If it's true. If it is true. And then to add more to all this, we have this doctor, a PhD from MIT. So he's not a wimpy guy. He's a very smart guy who provided medical analysis where he looked at several counties from Michigan, and he came to the conclusion, along with some of his guests, saying, you know what, this is not possible. The results of the elections from those counties do not add up. There's fraud. There's fraud involved. A pretty bold thing to be saying from a guy who's got PhD in mathematics from MIT, you know. The media, I don't think, has examined his research. It was a whole hour video. that I saw. I think his evidence is quite compelling, but the media is not examining what he's saying. In either case, I do believe that after everything is said and done, that this will ultimately head to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is the one who's going to judge the outcome of this election, or help to judge the outcome of this election. So the question is, could there be a reversal of the results? Yes. I mean, if, and only if, what they're saying about the Dominion software is true, there's no question in my mind that there will be a reversal. And Trump will win the election, hands down, if all this is true. And again, if it was to happen, I can see some Democrats who will accept, although they'll be shocked at the corruption, but they'll accept it. But there are others, I believe, and hardcore Democrats who are not going to accept it, and they're going to reject Trump winning this election, and they're going to riot. And there's going to be looting and rioting and burning of our cities. And just remember that when Trump lost among the conservatives, I mean, even though they're upset, and there are many conservatives who are upset, who feel that the election has been stolen from them, they're not rioting, they're not looting, they're not burning down cities. So again, if the situation is reversed, I wonder what's going to happen. How are Democrats going to react? Some Democrats are going to react. Again, I suspect that there will be rioting and looting and burning down of our cities. And so that also brings me to Dana Coverstone's his data dream. This is a very important dream. In fact, when I first saw it back in late October, I didn't understand the symbolism behind this dream. But now I think that it's becoming clear what this dream is really all about. And so the dream date of this data dream is from October 20th. And I believe he posted it late October or so. He posted this dream. 60-minute video, okay? So let me share with you the dream itself. So at the beginning of the dream, you saw this atlas map of the United States, okay? And they were all interconnected with each other. You also saw a network of circuits that ran across this nation. And these circuits, they were carrying data. And they were carrying data from one area to another area. So data was traveling, information, like computer circuits, you know, like when you send an email from one place to your loved one who lives in another state, you know, that has to travel through circuits, okay? So data was traveling in these circuits. And he also saw people who were wearing lab coats who were working on a certain data, you know, trying to make sure everything was just right. And there was also a concern that some circuits were getting hot, that they were overheating, and they had to control it. Make sure that it did not overheat. And then he saw, again, the West Coast map of the United States, and then he saw the data traveling eastward. And as it was traveling eastward, he heard warning sirens. Some of the circuits had overloaded, and they had to control that and take care of those circuits which had overheated. Okay, and then as a result of that, some of the data was being rerouted to other cities, and specifically, there's only 3 cities he mentioned in the whole dream, but the first 2 he mentioned were go around Reno and get to Vegas. Go around Reno and get to Vegas. Okay, so 2 cities that are found in the state of Nevada. Okay. And then the dream continued. We also saw smoke clouds in the big cities, but these were not ordinary clouds. In fact, these are clouds that were containing data. Again, this all had to do with computer information that these data contain. Important information. Okay? And then you also saw a countdown clock. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then the focus was shifted to the East Coast. The data was traveling now to the East Coast. And then suddenly, the focus was on the city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia. So this is the 3rd city that he mentions in the data dream. Only 3 cities: Reno, Las Vegas, and Philadelphia. So finally got to Philadelphia, and as the data was traveling to Philadelphia, going directly to Philadelphia, he saw a red network line. The data was being contained in there. It was traveling straight into the city of Philadelphia. And in fact, the cable, went underneath the Liberty Bell. And then at one point in the dream, the pressure from all this data began to build up. And then it blew up. And it blew the Liberty Bell up into the sky. It split into two and then fell into the ground. And so now I want to give you my interpretation. This is strictly my interpretation of what the data dream is all about. I happen to believe that the data represents the election results, and specifically the actual voting of the election. Okay, that's data, computer stuff, especially the fact that there was a number of places that did it with the computer. So that's the data, the election results from 2020. The workers were the poll workers tabulating the results, and people behind the scenes working with the results of the election. The hot circus represents the fact that Trump was leading in specific states. And the fact that it was overheating and they were trying to control that suggests that workers were trying to prevent a Trump victory in those particular states. And so they had to do whatever they had to do to make sure that he did not win that particular state. And then finally, he saw the data then traveling all the way to inside to Philadelphia. I think that the red network line represents the fact that Trump was leading on election night, leading even in the state of Pennsylvania. Okay. Now, the final state, of course, is Philadelphia, and indeed, if you think about it, according to the press, the state of Pennsylvania and the state of Nevada were the two states that gave Biden the final victory to the election. Is it an accident that among all the cities he mentioned, three of them, both of them, two of them were from Nevada and one of them was from Pennsylvania. And in fact, it was Philadelphia, the city that put him on top, because from the votes and mail-in ballots, it put Biden on top. Philadelphia, the last city to put Biden on top. Is that a coincidence? Is that an accident? I don't think so. I think it's all connected to the election itself. And the fact that you saw the destruction of the Liberty Bell, I think, represents the corruption and the destruction of our democracy due to the corruption of the election, that the Liberty Bell split in half. Also signifies our divided nation as well. However, the dream does not end there. And this is also significant, because after it reached Philadelphia and there was a split of the bell, the data continued to travel all the way to Washington, D.C. He also saw people dress, and got to Washington, D.C., saw people who were dressed in business clothes. This represents the lawyers who will be arguing before the Supreme Court regarding our election. He also saw judges and lawyers. And these judges and lawyers, they were desperately trying to stop the data from reaching Washington, D.C. They did not want these cases to end up in the Supreme Court. They were trying to put an end in it. They were trying to end it right there in their respective cities and state. But in the end, it did reach the Supreme Court. And as we all know, the Supreme Court has already stepped in, and I believe they will continue to ultimately decide the outcome of our election. And then the data finally reached the Capitol building. And when he got there, he saw that the Capitol building exploded and split in half. And then he also saw, as a result of the explosion, he saw a smoke cloud. And within that smoke cloud, he saw an important word. And that word was discovery. Discovery. Now, initially, I had mentioned that I believe that that word discovery means the fact that people are going to discover the corruption of our election, and it's going to shock this nation. But since I recorded the sermon on November, the 9th, also discovered this, that the word discovery is an actual legal term, a legal term. And ultimately it means this. Discovery is a fact-finding process that takes place after a lawsuit has been filed and before a trial in the matter, in order to allow the parties in the case to prepare for settlement or trial. So is during the discovery phase of a trial that the facts gets revealed. Gets revealed. Is it an accident? That was the word he saw in that cloud, in the smoke cloud, the word discovery. Again, it's a legal term. It's a legal term. I think, again, I believe it is during this discovery phase that America is going to learn the true extent of our corruption, of what happened in our election. And it's going to shock this nation. It's going to be huge, according to what the lawyers are saying. In either case, after they saw the word discovery, people then, I believe, politicians began to run away, not from the Capitol building, not from the explosion, but from the word discovery. Run away because they didn't want to get caught up in the midst of the corruption that the discovery would ultimately reveal to the nation. They didn't want to be involved in all that corruption. So they began to run away from it all. Quite interesting. And then there was a shift in the scenes of the dream. And then there was a new scene. And in this scene, he saw a closed casket. Somebody had died. And there were very important people there gathered around the funeral of this person. There was a sign on the casket, and it was, of course, a reference to Joe Biden. In fact, the sign said this: Democratic candidate for the office of president. And it was Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden who had died. And there was also a date above the casket, and that date was December 17th, so approximately a little over a month from now. So, does that signify that on December 17th, Joe Biden is going to die? Potentially, it could signify his death. It can also signify that his political career will come to an end at that date, and he will never rise again as a politician. Or, in the worst case scenario, it could also signify he's going to take his life. I don't know. But it could be a literal death, or it can be symbolic death, a symbolic death to his political career. Time will soon tell. I do believe, so firmly believe, that this is going to drag out at least until December, just like it did in 2000. And the Supreme Court is going to have to step in and try to figure out if there was indeed corruption, if there was fraud, and if there were people trying to have an honest and fair election. They will have to figure this all out. And it's here where Justice Amy Coney Barrett is going to play an important and crucial role for the Supreme Court deciding on whether there was corruption in our election. Which reminds me of a dream he had on August 13th. This was for the month of October. And I mentioned in the second part of the sermon series, I mentioned that there was a finger that was emphasizing the second and the third week in October. And he saw a bunch of politicians who were absolutely angry and outraged about something that had taken place. And back then, the second sermon of the sermon series, I mentioned that was a reference to the confirmation process of Amy. And that many politicians were very upset that she had been nominated to the Supreme Court, and they were doing everything in their power to make sure that she would not get nominated. And they were absolutely outraged, and that was the talk about for 2 weeks. That's all the media was talking about for 2 weeks. Her nomination to the Supreme Court. In the end, she made it. And it also, in that same dream of October, he saw this rock that landed on a large pond, and this began to cause ripple effects, and soon there were waves that it caused. I also now believe and realize that could be a reference to her appointment. It's going to cause ripple effects and huge waves in the end. It's going to be absolutely monumental, her presence in the Supreme Court. And if this interpretation is accurate, where there's going to be a reversal of our election and maybe even exposure of the deep corruption in our nation, you can imagine that that's going to cause the stock market to crash. It would cause such an instability in the stock market. Again, it would crash. And he did say in one of his dreams that the market would crash in the month of December. In the month of December. So all this could be related, again, to the election and the results of this election. In either case, come December 17, we're going to find out whether Dana Coverstone got it right or whether he got it wrong, whether he was indeed, truly hearing from God, or whether he was not hearing from God, whether he was just simply deluded. Time is soon going to tell. And among us Christians, we need to be patient and faithful, no matter what the outcome may be, whether this is true or not true. We have to be patient. And I'm going to end it with this, because our focus is not on Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Our focus is on Jesus Christ. So I'll end it with this. Philippians chapter 3, verses 13b through 14. I focus, this is Paul speaking, I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. So again, we as believers, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. Again, we cannot have our expectations based upon Trump winning this election or Biden winning this election. Our faith and focus should be on Christ, our Savior, our Redeemer. No matter what the outcome may be, that's never going to change. So let's keep our eyes on the prize, and let's keep our eyes on Jesus. And let the people of God say, amen and amen. And so, as I mentioned originally when I recorded this message, stay tuned. I think there might be more coming. Especially to see what happens with the results. And I think we'll know more in December, maybe even as early as late November, during the discovery process as well. And Dana Coverstone may have more dreams about what's going to happen next year. So stay tuned. But also be praying. We need to be praying right now for our nation, for God's will to be done. Stay tuned, and maybe we'll see each other soon, very soon. God bless you all. Be blessed.